Hello everyone and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. We begin today talking about Oklahoma's canola crop, which is a good 3 weeks ahead of schedule. With more perspective, here's our Extension Cropping System Specialist, Josh Lofton.
Well, we're moving along very nicely. The canola, depending on where you are in the state, we're kind of hitting our stride. We've come up. We've come out of green up. We've kind of started getting after our spring growth. That's what kind of 80 and 90 degree days in February will do to it. But we're seeing a lot of canola coming out of dormancy, really starting to get some aggressive growth, putting on that green tissue again, and really coming out. Now I'll tell you the biggest thing we're concerned with is when we're starting to see things come out of dormancy. Some of it's not actually coming out, and we had thought that we had a whole lot more survive with less winter kill than we actually did. There's some that are the original plant has died, and it's starting to get almost not exactly like wheat and tillers, but it's starting to get little branches coming out of the axillary buds, or the buds that are kind of around the normal growth point. If those come on and get some good growth and get some good conditions, we could still get a lot of those acres harvested. Other than that, we haven't had a whole lot of acreage just completely winter killed. It's just spots, which might not hurt our harvested acres, but might do worse for us in the yield per acre, because we are seeing these, and they're not typically really big spots. They're just, you know, larger spots in the field that have had issues with winter kill, and therefore the plant is either severely stunted or is no longer living. If you haven't started bolting, you're probably going to start to. We have 80 degree temperatures on the horizon. That plant's going to start moving forward. We are in March. It's a little early in March for what we like to see. So if you haven't put out your weed control, your fertilizer and canola, now's the time. The other big thing we're seeing is a lot earlier than we normally see. Our green peach and our cabbage aphids are a really big concern. Heath Sanders, our agronomist in Southwest Oklahoma, picked up some to where essentially the whole plant was covered in aphids. When you're going out there and putting your weed control, scout, and if you have to pair a pyrethroid in with that weed control, you know, now's the time that we probably still can get some control with those pyrethroids in some of these insect pests. So the one thing we really like about canola is once we've got it to this stage, it's very flexible. If we were to go really cold next week, this canola plant would just sit here and wouldn't go dormant, so to say, but just would sit here and wait for these good conditions. It gets a little more sensitive when we start getting flowers and pods out. But the good thing about canola that we don't have in wheat, this is where we like to say if you can get it to this stage in canola, it can do you well, is because if we get a major freeze event, since it's indeterminate, it sets on flowers throughout a multiple day, multiple week period, then we can recover a substantial amount of yield. We had that last year where we had a really heavy freeze right around the 1st of April. We saw a lot of yield get shed on that bottom half of that raceme. We still had really good yields. So it's our bigger concern is getting that late freeze when we have a substantial amount of that raceme filled out, and not allowing that plant to kind of make up with further reproductive growth. So that is our biggest concern right now, since we are seeing that crop quite a bit ahead of schedule, is what's going to happen if we get a freeze in April. You know, the growth of this crop this year is very, very challenging. We are seeing some of our better growth in some of our later planted canola because it didn't have as much winter kill, and it didn't have as much shedding of the green material because it was much smaller. We see here, this is a trial that probably shouldn't have made it. This was planted around Halloween. And so it looks really good right now, and it's bolting right now, where we have some just down the road here that was planted around the 1st of October into September. It's not quite bolting yet, and so it's really, I think, more of a planting date issue, but it does, once we start getting those good conditions, those warm temperatures, if we have soil moisture, and the places that have soil moisture, that's when that crop's going to start taking off and getting going. So if you have good soil moisture, which I think most of the state does right now, and we get those 80, 85 degree temperatures, yeah, you're going to start seeing that crop progressing pretty rapidly.
Tom Royer, our extension entomologist, joins us now. And Tom, it sounds like the insects are also ahead of schedule.
They are. I've already gotten reports of aphids in canola this year, which is a little bit early and a little bit troubling because typically our seed treatments hold them back for quite a while, and yet we're seeing some buildup. I've gotten reports of some buildup in certain areas of the state. I've also gone out and looked at plots and seen diamondback moths out active at this time of the year pretty early as well. So I'm really encouraging anybody that's producing canola to get out and scout their fields for aphids and diamondback moth.
We're here at the Magruder plots near campus. Tell us about your research here and then give us a scouting demonstration here in the week.
Okay, there's a lot of producers that add an insecticide when they do a top dress nitrogen application. I've always wondered how effective it is and whether it's cost effective, whether it's actually adding any benefit when they do that. So we have some plots right here where we're going to evaluate that insecticide application by itself in combination with the top dress nitrogen application. We're also just looking at a nitrogen application by itself, and then we're going to have some untreated so I can get an idea of, is it paying for itself? And so we're going to do this at several locations over the next few years, working with David Marburger. So I have that information, and when a producer asks me if I think it's a good thing or not, I can hopefully give them a research-based answer.
You'll have some data to analyze.
Yes, absolutely.
If you advise folks to get out and scout, and you have just a clear little box here, you can buy these for about $1.
Yes.
And this is a good tool to use?
It is, because it's about 1 foot long, and we always talk about aphids per foot of row. So the key is to find out how many plants you have in a foot of row, and then the scouting procedure is you just count the aphids as you knock them out. So I'll demonstrate. I get down, you put this right up next to the base of the plants, tap the plants. Any aphids that are laying on the plants will fall in, and then you just take a count. And we don't have very many aphids in this plot right here, but you just count the number of aphids you have here. You can divide that by the number of plants you have, take a few samples, and that gives you an idea of what a treatment threshold that we recommend for bird chariot aphid or green bugs.
So do these at various spots around your fields?
Usually recommend at least going to five different spots in the field, or 10. Doesn't take very long, but it gives you a good idea of what populations you have throughout the field.
Now, in terms of any treatment plan or guidance this time of year, what do you recommend?
The key is, if you're already putting a top dress application and making a trip across the field, all you are really bearing is the cost of the insecticide, versus if you have to make a separate trip where you have to pay for that trip across the field again, it's going to cost more. So that's part of the reason that I want to find out more about this, because it really is, for a farmer, cheaper to add something while they're already going across the field versus having to do a separate trip.
In terms of diamondback moths, is the scouting procedure the same way?
No, the scouting procedure for diamondback moths in canola is that you have to just go out and look for physical damage on the leaves. They're chewing. It's a little more difficult to estimate damage, and we don't really have good thresholds for it, but if you're seeing a lot of holes being chewed in the leaves and the plants are still pretty small, that would be a good time, because they can build up in numbers every 3 or 4 weeks to the point where they'll be very difficult to control. It's also a little different to scout canola for aphids because they like to be on the underside of the leaves, so you have to tip those leaves up. This system doesn't work very good for canola like it does for wheat, so you actually have to tip them up and count the aphids underneath the leaf.
There are some ways to battle these to kind of fight back between now and harvest.
There is, and I just think it's really important. The first step is to get out and look at your field and see what you have, because a lot of times people get surprised, and sometimes these populations build up so fast that they become very difficult to control and a lot more expensive to control. So it's better to be out early looking for things and being ready to take action if you need to.
Tom, some great guidance there as we kind of head toward harvest these next couple of months. Best of luck with your research out here, and please keep us posted.
Thank you.
And for a link to the information that Tom mentioned, go to sunup.okstate.edu.
This week was one of tragedy and suffering for families in the path of raging fires. As of Wednesday, 1 death was reported in Oklahoma, 1 fatality in Kansas, and the deaths of 5 people in Texas. Along with these fatalities were cattle losses estimated in the thousands, uncounted horses, and unknown wildlife losses. Ranchers moved what livestock they could, hoping animals would be safe from rapidly advancing flames. Firefighters responded to the call, risking their own safety to protect what they could. We are so thankful for the efforts and sacrifice by these firefighters. Early March has seen a number of fires each day, with significant acres burned. On Sunday, March 5th, the Oklahoma Department of Forestry recorded 74 fire starts in Oklahoma. Acreage burned from that high number was dwarfed by Monday's fires. Monday, March 6th, only 12 fires were reported, but with strong winds and after a week of low humidities, these fires raced across large areas. By Wednesday morning, an estimated 840,000 acres had burned in Oklahoma and Kansas, with 3 large fire complexes. A number of weather factors set the stage for these fires to be so destructive. The Keetch Byram Drought Index on Sunday, March 5th, indicated that Texas, Beaver, Harper, Woodward, and Ellis counties were the driest areas in Oklahoma. Eva, Goodwell, Slapout, and Woodward all had Keetch Byram drought indexes above 500. This drought index is driest at 800. Over the last 30 days through Wednesday, good amounts of rain had fallen in the green map areas across the majority of Oklahoma. The yellow areas received more than 4 inches of rain over 30 days. The blue areas in the northeast and western parts of the state were shorted for rainfall in February. The meager amounts in the panhandle were just enough to get the dust to stick to windows and cars. Relative humidities have been unusually low for early March. The highest afternoon humidity on March 1st was 23% at Westville. Relative humidities in the red areas were below 15%. March 2nd was almost a duplicate. March 3rd afternoon humidities were a dash higher, but still below 25%. On March 4th, afternoon humidities were much higher across most of the state, but the panhandle remained below 25%. On Sunday, March 5th, blue areas had drizzle with high humidities, but out in the panhandle, humidities were just over 10%. On Monday, March 6th, what would be the largest fire, Starbuck Fire, ignited between 11 a.m. and noon. At noon, the humidity at Beaver was 15%. The wind on March 6th was ferocious in the panhandle. The pink areas had average wind speeds above 40 miles per hour at 11 a.m., noon, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 p.m. At 6 p.m., the winds tapered off somewhat as a cold front approached the state, but by 7 p.m., a wind shift with strong northwesterly winds began driving the fires to the southeast. We hope for quick aid and a speedy recovery for all those impacted by these destructive fires. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Mesonet Weather Report.
Even though we're still in the midst of the spring calving season and the breeding season is several weeks away, now I think it's a good time for ranchers to schedule with their local veterinarian to have the bulls put through what we call a breeding soundness exam to make sure that the bulls that we're going to turn out this spring are best suited to get the job done, the job that we've purchased them to do, and that of course is to get cows bred. When you schedule that breeding soundness exam, I'd also talk to that veterinarian about the need to have a trichomoniasis test done on our bulls. In some cases that may be necessary, in other cases they may say, no, we don't need to do that this year. But I certainly would visit about that particular subject. When it comes time to take the bulls in for the breeding soundness exam, expect to have about 4 different things happen to those bulls. Number one, a general health condition of the bull will be examined. The body condition is going to be very, very important. We'd like to have those bulls in a body condition score 6 at the start of a breeding season, but also the veterinarian will look to see if they're sound on their feet and legs, if the eye health is clear, and of course if the bulls have any indication of disease or sickness that could impair their reproduction. Then there will be an examination of the reproductive tract, both internally and externally. They'll do an internal exam via the rectum to check the secondary sex glands to make sure that there's no inflammation or potential problems in that area. And then an external exam of the reproductive tract will take place to look for any kind of adhesions, abnormalities, perhaps abscesses or warts that could cause some problems with the bull trying to breed cows. Also, an examination of the scrotum, including scrotal circumference, will be made, and there will be a minimum number of centimeters that bull must have a scrotal circumference in order to pass the breeding soundness exam. And then the fourth area, of course, is a semen sample will be taken from the bull and examined underneath the microscope. They will look for both motility of the sperm cells, and there must be an absolute minimum of 30% of the cells going forwardly motile in that microscope field area. Also, they will look for the shape of the cells, and at least 70% of the cells must be a normal shape in order for the bull to pass the breeding soundness exam. Well, after all of this is done, then the veterinarian will look through the entire exam, and if the bull passes all of these different areas, then they will mark him as a satisfactory breeder. If he absolutely fails in one of the areas where the veterinarian will assume that this situation is bad enough that it can't be corrected, then they will mark him as an unsatisfactory breeder. Another possibility is that, especially with young bulls, that there may be some areas where they just don't quite meet the minimum standards of a breeding soundness exam just due to their age. And the veterinarian knows that in 4 to 6 weeks, the bull will change enough that he might go ahead and pass. And so they'll mark him classification deferred. I think that's an important thing for our producers to understand, that some of these bulls may change in a short period of time, and we may not want to cull him based on just that first breeding soundness exam, especially if the veterinarian calls him classification deferred. I'd certainly do this as soon as possible so that if we have some bulls that do not pass the breeding soundness exam, that we've got 30 days or more in order to go to a production sale or to a purebred producer in our area and replace any of those bulls that do not pass the breeding soundness exam this year. I hope that'll help you get the bulls ready for this upcoming breeding season And we sure look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
Kim Anderson, our crop marketing specialist, is here now. And Kim, let's talk about those just released March WASDE numbers.
Well, there wasn't really any surprises to the numbers, but let's go through each one of them. You look at, for the United States, for wheat, the analysts thought or projected that we'd have 1,135,000,000 bushels. It came in at 1,129,000,000, right at that estimate, and really no change from last month. You look at corn, the analyst said 2.317 billion bushels. It came in at 2.30, right at that estimate, and about the same as last month. With soybeans, if there's any surprise, this is probably where it is. They were expecting 418 million. It came in at 435. That's about 15 million bushels above last year.
As we know, prices are relatively low. Let's look at some of the reasons how we got to this point.
Well, I've been looking at that, and if you look at the world production, go back 9 years, we were at 22.5 billion bushels in 07. Last year was over 27 billion bushels. You look at consumption, the good news is consumption's increased, but we produced about over 400 million bushels each year for the last 9 years, more than we consumed. Now, if you look at world yields, our harvested acres, they've increased marginally since 2007, but look at the last 4 years of U.S. average bushels. At 2007, it was 42 bushels an acre. That was a record. In 2013, it was 48 bushels. 2014, 49 bushels. 15, 49 bushels. And 2060, 50 bushels. So you've seen world yield per acre go from 42 to 50 in the last 9 years. You haven't seen that in the United States, and that's why we have record production, and that's why we have low prices.
So as we look ahead a little bit at the 17-18 marketing year, what are the production expectations looking like?
Well, for the United States, we're looking at going from about 2.3 billion down to 1.8, 1.9 billion. If you look at the world, they're 27 billion. It might fall off to 26.5, but not much. The big decline in production is going to be in the United States, maybe Australia, but you're looking at the former Soviet Union countries, other countries around the world, they're not going to cut back very much.
And then with all that in mind, your price expectation?
Well, right now the market's offering $3.90. I've been calling for $4.25. That's assuming that we have test weight and protein. I think if it's managed properly, we can get that. Later in the year, if we could have lower yields around the world, we could see 4.50 or 5. But right now, I'm looking at averaging for the year around 4.25.
Okay, Kim Anderson, thanks a lot. We'll see you soon. Finally, today, we want to revisit a popular SUNUP segment that takes Jenks High School students to an outdoor classroom to learn about the science of fire and prescribed burning. SUNUP's Curtis Hare picks up the story from there.
All right, let's start down here. So this is definitely a unique opportunity for high school students here at Jenks. You know, it's probably the only, and definitely the only one in Oklahoma, probably the only one in the U.S. where high school students are going to have an opportunity to learn about fire effects, fire ecology, and the impact of what fire does. And it's just a great opportunity to have.
We designed a long-term study site for the students at Jenks High School, and then hopefully in the future it will trickle down to the rest of the public schools so that we would be able to have groups, you know, from kindergarten up through the high school coming out and doing various activities. My high school students in class, we do talk quite a bit about the prescribed burn process and the amount of planning that goes into that, the science behind it. So to kind of educate them and try to eliminate any misconceptions. Obviously, anytime you burn, there are risks involved, but there are ways to definitely reduce or eliminate a lot of those risks.
To me, one of the bigger things that comes out of this is to show these students and stuff that fire isn't that negative Smokey the Bear connotation that we've all been brought up with and grown up with, that fire is important, fire is needed on the land, and just all the benefits that can be derived from it.
Researchers say that prescribed burning is extremely beneficial for soil fertility, and Yonkers students will be able to go out, analyze, and study the effects of it. The practice has been done in Oklahoma for centuries.
Right. And again, Native Americans were the #1 fire user. Lightning did have an impact, but Native Americans, so people have always shaped this landscape that we live in here in Oklahoma and throughout the U.S. But yeah, it was huge. And a lot of these areas that we look at now that we think of as scattered trees and things like that, you go back and look at just at the turn of the century, right before statehood, look at a lot of the historical photographs across the state, especially even in this part of northeast Oklahoma. It was a treeless prairie. Very few trees could be seen in a lot of that stuff, and it's very unique to see that. And I think a lot of times when you show people that and then show them, and say, hey, the fire was why that happened, people start to understand and put things together that, hey, fire is important, and we probably need to put it back in the system and allow it to function like it's supposed to.
I think it's an amazing opportunity. Not a lot of high schoolers, at least from where I'm from, had any type of opportunity, whether it was field work or just to burn. So that's really amazing. Early exposure is always great, especially for kids who are really interested in outdoors and want to get into wildlife or forestry or range management or anything like that.
And I think one of my big motivations, having grown up in Oklahoma myself, is just for students to appreciate their natural heritage. And being in where Tulsa is located, kind of on the border between the central irregular plains and the cross timbers, for them to learn more about that. But you have to appreciate the role that fire plays in those ecosystems if you're going to really understand how those ecosystems function naturally.
That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime online on our website and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.